Hi, welcome to the Connecticut Mirror's digital town hall on caregiving and aging in Connecticut, sponsored by AARP. I'm Ariel Levin-Becker, the health reporter for the Connecticut Mirror. I'm here to introduce our guests. Starting in alphabetical order, Ann Foley is the Undersecretary for Policy Development and Planning for the state's Office of Policy and Management. She's been in that department for more than 25 years and has served as a senior policy advisor to 4 secretaries of policy and management. And she's also been a lecturer at the UConn School of Social Work. Amy Goyer from AARP is an expert on aging and families. She has a particular expertise in caregiving. She spent more than 30 years advocating for older adults and families and has written books on the subject, including a free ebook called Juggling Work and Caregiving. She also has personal experience as having been the primary caregiver for both of her parents. Kevin Kelly is a state senator from the 21st District. He represents Monroe, Seymour, Shelton, and Stratford. He's the ranking member on the Insurance and Real Estate Committee and the Aging Committee. He's also an elder law attorney and has sponsored several bills relating to aging and long-term care, and he previously worked as an investigator at the State Department of Social Services. So as certainly our guests know, Connecticut's population is aging. There's going to be a major increase in people over 65 according to projections, while the working age population is expected to stay flat or decline. That's likely to mean a major need for more caregivers, both the paid workforce and unpaid caregivers, people who take care of loved ones for free. Connecticut's been moving toward providing more long-term care to people in homes or in community settings rather than in nursing homes, and that's also expected to increase the reliance on family members and other people who provide care for free. So with that as a backdrop, we're going to get started with our panel. Anne, maybe can you give us an overview of the projected needs for caregivers in the coming years in Connecticut, and what some of the policies are in place to try to make sure there will be enough caregivers available?
Sure. Thank you, and thank you for hosting this forum. We do appreciate it. What we're seeing is, and we've been looking quite a bit lately at the demographic data in Connecticut and what kinds of services and supports we have available for long-term, to meet those long-term care needs. What we're seeing is, as you're probably aware, a huge increase in the number of elderly in the state. We are expecting that about 70% of elderly will need long-term services and supports as they age. So when we're looking at, a significant increase in the number of elderly, we're looking at right now we have about 500,000 who are over age 65. We're looking in the next 15 years to see that increase to up about 800,000, and that represents a significant increase, as you mentioned, in the proportion of older folks from 14% today to about 21% in 2020, and then kind of leveling off. So, so with that increase in the elderly population and the amount or the proportion of elderly that we think will need long-term services and supports, we really need to make sure that we have sufficient services and supports in place and the right kind of services and supports in place. So I don't know if you started by talking about defining what we're talking about when we talk about long-term services and supports, but what we're looking at in the state is really a broad range of types of assistance that that people need, from activities of daily living to medical and more long-term chronic disease conditions. So I don't know if that answers what the original question was.
Great, yes, thank you. Maybe Senator Kennedy, if you could talk a little bit about policies that, sort of in your experience, you think a state needs to undertake to ensure that there are enough caregivers, both paid and unpaid, and to sort of address issues of burnout and making sure there is supply, both things that you think the state is doing that will achieve that, and areas where you see gaps and where you'd like to see some changes.
Certainly, and what Anne just explained was really what many in the area have called the silver tsunami, where we have a mature population today that is, with particularly the baby boomers starting to move into retirement, it's only going to exacerbate what we have right now. And one fact that we know is that we're spending about 10% of our state budget on Medicaid, which is a significant appropriation. And as we go forward, the number of 800,000, I think, might be a little bit on the conservative side. So we really have to start focusing today with a long-term plan in order to put the proper things in place and services and care in place so that aging in place can be a reality. Now, some of the things that we've done so far is we've had task forces over the past 2 legislative sessions dealing with aging in place, and then last year Alzheimer's. This year we've got one going on home and community-based services. So we're going to start looking at what we can do to help family. And I think what we first have to do is start to thank those people who are caregivers, both, I mean, literally, but also help them. I think we need to look at Alzheimer's respite. I think we need to, enrich that program, make it a little bit more accessible. Look at aging in place initiatives through the Connecticut Home Care Program. I'd like to see that become a little bit more expanded. Once again, what we need to do is not only focus on caregivers, but also those seniors who might not have caregivers attached because their kids live out of state or in other parts of the country. And we need to be able to set the table so that those individuals have the resources to be able to afford and purchase. And I know 2 places that I think we need to go is to look at the community spouse protected amount and increase that, as well as look at more long-term things such as long-term care insurance and providing tax incentives to get people into that. Because as Ann pointed out, we know that 70% of our population may need some form of care in the community, but today only 8% of our population has purchased long-term care. We know that that's about $3,000 in average policy. So we have to start to incentivize bringing private dollars into the equation, as well as thanking the caregivers who do a tremendous job. I mean, I know that the 2009 statistic was that their efforts was worth over $5 billion, which is twice the amount that we pay in Medicaid on an annual basis. So, we really have to say thank you to those people, because without their efforts, I don't think we'd be able to care for our seniors today.
Thank you. That's a great segue into our next question for Amy, which is just about the role that unpaid caregivers play in the system. I know people have sometimes referred to them as the backbone of the long-term care system. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about both who's providing the care, what's the extent of the care they're providing, and also about one of the challenges that I think has been identified in the past, which is the difficulty in making sure that people who are caregivers recognize themselves that way and actually think of themselves as caregivers. So.
I thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. I think Senator Kelly said something really important in that we need to thank and acknowledge the work that these caregivers are doing. Family caregivers have always been the backbone of the long-term care system, and it's only going to be more and more so. Right now, most recent data that AARP has found is that there are 7 available caregivers for each person who might be needing care. Essentially, we use someone over the age of 80. By 2030, 2040, it's going to come down by 2050 to 3 to 1. So as the baby boomers are aging, there are going to be fewer available family members to play this role. So they're going to have even more pressure on everyone who is providing the care. I think, you point out that oftentimes caregivers don't look at themselves that way. I'm just a daughter. I'm a granddaughter. I'm a husband or a wife. I'm a friend. I'm a neighbor. I'm a niece or nephew. I just am doing what you do with family. But the problem with that is that they don't think about accessing the resources that are available to them as caregivers, or looking for help that's actually out there, or getting the support that they need. So I think, number one, we have to recognize identify ourselves as doing a really incredible and incredibly important job in that we're caring for loved ones and acknowledge and thank caregivers. We know that many caregivers are working. In fact, 3/4 of caregivers work at some point while they're in this journey. So we need to look at supports for caregivers, hands-on supports and how we actually provide the care, but how do we juggle work at the same time and all the other aspects of our lives? And that's where the long-term care, 9 out of 10 people want to age in place. And in AARP Connecticut just did a recent survey, and they found 66% of people said that's the way it should be. People should be able to age in their homes. And we agree, and so let's look at what needs to be in place so that people can do that.
Thank you. A question for our Connecticut policy folks here, Senator Kelly and Foley from OPM. I've heard from home care agencies that they're very concerned about their financial viability, particularly on the rates paid by Medicaid. Curious if you have concerns about Medicaid rates. Are they adequate? And if you have thoughts on what needs to be done to ensure that there are enough paid caregivers available. Maybe we'll start with Senator Kelly.
Well, I think that when we start to look at those that are going to care for our seniors, and if we want to have them viable in the community, then we got to make sure that they have the proper not only care and resources, but that we meet that with the proper appropriation. I don't think the care providers right now are paid or reimbursed at the appropriate rates. I understand that that's an appropriation, but the fact remains, as Ann pointed out, that if 90% of the people don't want to go to a nursing home, we know that care in the community is arguably better and less expensive. It's like the old Fram oil filter. You can pay me now or you can pay me later, and I would rather make the investment in community-based services to enable people what they want rather than pay the more costly institutional care that is sometimes 2 or 3 times the cost. So I think we need to put more money into this area, and I think we need to do a little bit more with regards to the caregivers and just other policies, and to enable families to keep the resources they have as they spend down their resources toward Medicaid eligibility, to keep this as a potential for individuals to age in place.
Ann?
Yeah, well, I think that one of the important things that we did this year in the budget was to increase home care rates. We gave them a 1% COLA starting in January, and that doesn't sound like very much, but when you look at the budget, the state budget for the coming year, there weren't a lot of places that received increases, but we did recognize that one of the very important places for us to invest is in home care. And really part of the important balance for us is to recognize that some folks are still going to need nursing home care, nursing home level of care. Not everyone will be able to be served in their own home. So we have to continue to invest in nursing homes and make sure that they are funded appropriately. And we have done some work in that area. One of the things that we're working with them on now is to help them diversify, so that if they are looking at their business plan and they're seeing less folks coming in the door, which is where we want to be. The governor has made a huge investment in Money Follows the Person to move folks out. What are we going to do with that infrastructure that we have with nursing homes? So we have just we're working with nursing homes to provide them significant capital to diversify and think about, should they start to be using their nursing homes for other purposes, for adult daycare, for some other kinds of services that will be helpful to elderly and disabled in the community. So those are a couple of places that we are trying to invest. But clearly, Medicaid rates are not as high as private pay rates, But part of the problem with long-term care is that Medicaid is one of the only payers. That you don't see a lot of commercial payers other than what Senator Kelly was talking about, and we're all very, very much invested in the Connecticut Partnership for Long-Term Care, getting folks to think ahead and buy insurance policies if they're able to do that on their own, so that they can be ready when the need strikes for them to have sufficient and adequate home care available to them.
Great, thank you. Just sticking with Connecticut for a minute.
I think I lost.
Created programs the system, and if they need to take time off, they could potentially get paid leave for care to serve as caregivers. I'm curious if that's been explored at the Connecticut level, and if you have any thoughts about whether it's something that would be appealing in Connecticut, or do you think that, Senator Kelly?
I didn't quite get the whole question. I think you were talking about whether or not this. Well, could you restate the question?
Sure, of course. The question had to do with paid family leave programs. I believe California and New Jersey have set up programs where employees contribute money. They pay into a system, and if people need to take time off to care for somebody, they could potentially qualify for a certain amount of paid time off to provide care. I was wondering if that's something that's been considered in Connecticut, and if so, if it was something that you thought would be a good idea here or not.
Well, I haven't seen any of those initiatives come across our radar so far in the legislature, either before insurance or aging. I think if we start to put burdens on Connecticut employers any further than we already have, we're going to continue to make our bad job environment only worse. And we really don't want to do that because it's important to keep families working and to keep individuals with their jobs. But I think what we've been looking at, and some of the initiatives that I think are to go forward, are twofold. One, I think right now our policies are predicated upon and viewed through the Medicaid prism, and I think that's inappropriate because not everybody is going to be on Medicaid. Second, that's why when you look at initiatives based off of money follows the person, that's a case that requires people to go into a nursing home to get out of a nursing home. To me, that doesn't make sense in the first place. Although it is a legislative acknowledgement community to begin, and that they are here.
We're having some technical sound issues with Senator Kelly. We'll come back to him if you have additional remarks. Anne, do you have any thoughts on that issue?
Well, my thoughts on that issue are that, well, no, to answer your question, I haven't been aware of any kind of proposal or discussion of the kind of thing that you're talking about. But I think we also want to recognize that what we really want to build up here is a workforce of folks who can do this professionally rather than relying just on unpaid family caregivers. There are things that we can and do with regard to respite for family home caregivers, but really our focus has been on expanding the opportunities for workforce development, for home care, for paid caregivers to be able to relieve the unpaid caregivers. So I think that's pretty much been our focus and the focus that we hope to continue.
Senator Kelly, did you have any additional remarks that
Well, is my sound back?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, did you?
Well, obviously, what we want to do is not only get paid, but unpaid family care. I mean, that's the backbone, and we want to make sure that those individuals stay attached and involved in any care process. We are moving in one direction, looking at workforce development. I thought it was a good step to take with regards to APRNs and to make sure that primary care can come out and deal with individuals. Uh, but we also have to focus and not disregard what families do. And that is one area that I think we need to explore more, and where I think we can really help the program, and what we need to get more people involved with is not to just look at this as the Medicaid, look at the answer through the Medicaid prism, or answer every aging question as to what it's going to cost the state of Connecticut. Because many families hopefully will never come to the state for aid or assistance, but we still have to make sure that our state is a proper environment for people to age.
Amy, you had some additional comments?
Well, I just wanted to point out that this recent survey that AARP Connecticut did of residents of Connecticut over the age of 40 asked about support for working caregivers, and there's vast majority supported looking at possible measures that would help in terms of preventing firing if you take time off for caregiving, or perhaps paid sick leave, or using, providing unpaid time off for caregivers from work. So those are approaches that can be looked at for the upcoming year. You need to kind of look outside the box of how can we help these caregivers in the workplace. The other area that showed up as a really strong area of support was kind of solidifying and engaging hospitals with caregivers. I know that my dad came out of the hospital one time. He had a feeding tube, and I got about 5 minutes of training on how to deal with that. We had he was back in the hospital 3 times because of that feeding tube. I know, we find that caregivers, that's one of the biggest challenges. So another way to support these caregivers is to look at measures, and again, the AARP Connecticut survey showed a great deal of support for looking at ways to do that. So for example, requiring that hospitals provide some training on these medical tests when there is someone is discharged from the hospital, or notifying caregivers when major decisions are being made about their care, and just as simple as making sure that the hospital puts the caregiver's name in the record so they get the communication and they know it's everything that's going on. These things, people are in support of these things, so we need to look at wide range of ways to support caregivers. This is an issue that affects everyone. If you haven't been a caregiver, you're one now, or you're going to be one in the future, or you're going to be a care recipient. So everyone's interested in this. In Connecticut, about half of the people over the age of 40 in the state are caregiving now or have been in the past, and about 70% say they think it's likely that they will be in the future. So you just know this is an issue that affects so many people.
And one final question for everybody here. Just hoping you could maybe tell us what you see as the biggest challenge. Is there a problem that keeps you up at night about caregiving or about long-term care, or the thorniest issue that you're trying to work on that you think really will need to be addressed before we hit what Kelly referred to as the silver tsunami? Maybe start with Amy.
I think one of our biggest challenges is the fact that caregivers are so caught up in trying to keep all the balls in the air, as they often don't take care of themselves. And then we have another problem when the caregiver gets sick, and the caregiver needs care, and who's going to care for the first person? And this can be a real kind of a somersault down a hill. So I think one of the things that we need to do is in providing supports for family caregivers so they can continue providing this incredible service that they're providing, look at that in the long range, that it's worth putting an effort into providing that support, whether it's respite care or it's support groups, resources. AARP has a caregiving resource center online, aarp.org/caregiving, and anything that can connect caregivers with the support that they need is, in the long run, going to help everyone.
Senator Kelly?
Well, this whole area of aging in place, there's really no one issue that is so important. I mean, they're all important. It's cross section. There's reform in insurance products. There's reform needed in Medicaid. There's more nutrition and transportation and zoning regulations, workforce development. We've talked about hospitals. I mean, this really is a challenging area. That's what makes it so exciting. But also, what we need to do is look at things a lot more holistically than we used to. I mean, as we talk about the discharge from a hospital, just looking at that, tearing down the silos. Let's not just look at it from a medical model or a social model. There's more things that are in between. It must be hybrid. And in order to do that, for instance, you might have somebody that needs some insulin, and they can't afford the insulin, but if they were able to get some energy assistance, they'd get a little extra cash in their budget and be able to afford a full dose of insulin. So you got to look at things much more holistically, and I'm glad to see that over the past couple sessions we've at least raised the level of awareness of aging in Connecticut. We've looked at a couple of task force, and after each task force we've implemented many of these recommendations that they've come forward with. This year we're looking at community and home-based services as well as nutrition. So that's a good start. We've got to keep focusing on it, as I said, and as Ann had indicated. This is a growing population, and we have to do things today in order to make sure that we can handle it for tomorrow. And I'm excited to be part of the process. And thank you also for the invitation to be here this afternoon.
And Ann?
Okay, thanks. I think that over the past 4 years, the governor's taken a lot of steps to really rebalance the system. The long-term care system that we've had up until recently was obviously very institutional based and didn't offer the kinds of opportunities for care in the home that we'd like to see. So between Money Follows the Person, we didn't talk today about adult family living, but I think that that's a really important piece of the puzzle for family caregivers, because it's moving Connecticut into where some other states have been in terms of offering the opportunity for to receive payment in the home for 24-hour supervision of someone who needs help with activities of daily living. And so, those kinds of, looking at those kinds of innovative programs, I think we need to continue to do. As I mentioned, the workforce is one of those areas that that keeps me up at night. As you've said, you know, when you're a family caregiver, and I've been a family caregiver, you can't be there all of the time. And so a lot of times it's a hybrid. It's a mix of getting the right people in for when you can't be there. And we need to be very flexible in terms of providing those kinds of individualized supports and providing things like housing supports. Obviously, when you're in an institutional setting, you don't need to think about how you're going to provide housing, transportation, and those kinds of things. We need to continue to look at. We need to continue down this path of Money Follows the Person and moving. We've already moved out 2,000 people into the community and continue to do that, but at the same time supporting our nursing home facilities to really change their model. And they've been working with us in the state over a number of years to move folks out and move folks into the community where we can have a broader continuum of care. So, so those are the kinds of things that, and the other thing I didn't mention is that the place for people to go about information on long-term care services and supports in the state is My Place CT, the website My Place CT. And that offers a lot of information for caregivers, for folks that are looking for information about resources. It's the one website in the state where folks should be going to look at what's available.
Well, thank you very much to our panel, Amy Goyer from AARP, Senator Kevin Kelly from the 21st District, and Ann Foley from the Office of Policy and Management. Thanks very much to AARP, our sponsor. These were great conversation. Look forward to discussing this again. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.